pesticide use, such as the one today on online sales of pesticides. We hope to achieve this by learning from each other, sharing information and data, identifying gaps, and problem solving collectively, which you will see today. Our presenters will be taking us through various aspects of this. And really the goal is to reduce and prevent pesticide poisonings, chronic effects, and environmental contamination with a view to a toxic-free future for the next generation. So today's discussion is not a webinar, but rather a chat, and we really encourage participation from all of you who are attending today. So we are fortunate to have 4 panelists who will take us through 3 questions. After each presentation, for each question, we will go to the chat room and there will be a discussion. You will be encouraged to also vote on some polls, as you have done now with Mentimeter. And if you have not introduced yourself, please do continue in the chat to introduce yourself with your name, country, and organization. Natasha, could I have the next slide, please? So just to say that the topic today is different roles and perspectives for managing online sales of pesticides, which many of you are aware is a hot topic now and a complex topic for many countries to address. As I mentioned, we have 4 presenters representing government, industry, and NGOs. Next slide, please. So our government representatives who will be taking us through question 1 are Christopher Kanema and Tao Chuanjiang. I hope I've said your name right.
Good.
We'll need a lesson on that. And Darcy Quinn will speak on question 2 from CropLife, and Alia Diyana will be speaking to question 3 from the NGO PAN Asia Pacific. So welcome to all the presenters, and I thank you very much for your time. What I'm going to do is ask the presenters to introduce themselves as we get to your question, because I think it just saves a bit of time. So if we go to the next slide, please. We are going to move away from Chris's presentation in relationship to the Zambian perspective, and Tao will move straight to you. We'll go back to him when he's back on. So Tao, I invite you to just a brief introduction of yourself, and then I hand over to you to take us through to question 1. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Andrea. So you mean I start with my presentation firstly?
Yes.
Okay,
and if you just want to mention who you are, or would you like me to introduce you?
Okay, so thank you, Andrea. I'm Tao Chuanjiang. I'm from China, the Pesticide Registration Authority, IPAMA, and I also work with Andrea, with Darcy, as the JMPM panel member. So today I will really very briefly present the situation in China for online sales of pesticides, and also we work together for the JMPM guidance note development. Next, please. So, Natasha. Okay, thank you, Natasha. So we know the internet, the e-commerce was really developing very fast, especially in China. I never go to the supermarket. I can buy everything from the market, from internet, as well as the online sales pesticide. I even bought some pesticide from internet for my for flowers I planted on my balcony. So it's a lot. So I think some years ago, maybe 20 years ago, the industry start to sell the pesticide from internet, and after that, the distributors, the plant protection services, they joined, and now the third-party platforms, they being involved, and they are really developing very fast. So in China, we have Taobao, it's Alibaba in China, and we have Jingdong, and also we have other social media platforms. They started like WeChat, like TikTok. So the industry estimate the online sales of pesticide, they grow very fast. For example, the public health pesticide, they estimate 1/3, maybe more, maybe half of that kind of products was sold on the net. Next, please. So we have a lot of, we know there are some advantages for the industry, for the customers. They can save the cost, they can be convenient, they can just click the button and they can get the product next day. There are a lot of advantages. Next, please, Natasha. But also the online sales of pesticide bring a lot of challenges and risks. So for the regulatory authorities here, so we are concerning about the regulation, the enforcement, the monitoring, because for online sales, it's quite difficult comparing with traditional sales. For the sellers, they are hide behind the screen, so they need experiences, they need training, they need guidances, and also for the transportation. For the online sales, they use the normal transportation, storage, they mixed with the common goods together. Also for shipping, delivery, the couriers, they don't know. So also for customers, maybe there are some risks. They bought some illegal or counterfeit products, and also maybe they are misdirected by the information from the internet. So all of these things will increase the risks, the pesticide risk to human health and the environment. Next, please. So we already have some regulations, some measures to regulate online sales of pesticide. So we have some primary laws, but we also have the law, it's called Regulation of Pesticide Administration. By the law, we have administration of pesticide trade license. It's a regulation for distribution. So from that regulation, the online sales of pesticide or offline sales, they should meet the same standard. So they should have obtained the sales licenses, they should have qualified staff, they should have the brick and mortar store and stock room, they should have record to be reviewed. And but for online sales of pesticide, we have some specific rules. The banned pesticide, the restricted use pesticide, such as high toxic pesticide, HHPs, they are not allowed for online sales. And also the ministry, my ministry, they have annual supervision and inspection. So they have some special program to inspect or audit online sales. And also we have CCPIA, it's called China Crop Protection Industry Association. The CCPIA is leading a group to develop their own guidance. It's like a self-disciplined guidance. So they described the responsibilities, duties, services, and requirements for industry, for platforms, for online sellers. Next, please. And for JMPM, we started to draft the guidance note 2 years ago. So we have a consultant invited, my colleague, Mr. Zhang Wenjun, and we also have a working group. So we work a lot with Darcy and with Andrea. So we have a lot of suggestions, comments, and we discussed round and round. So hopefully we will finish the draft and endorse it maybe on the annual meeting this year. Next, please. So the guidance note, that's the structure of the guidance note. So we have introduction, we have overview, and the focal part is the consideration for the regulation of pesticide online sales. Next, please. So for the regulation of online sales of pesticide, we have some recommendations or suggestions. So first, the most important is the legislation or the license or the permit. So that means we encourage the JMPM. The JMPM will encourage the pesticide regulatory authorities, if they are developing or they want to update the regulations, they should consider online sales of pesticide to let that kind of situation meet the same standard as the traditional sales. We described the responsibilities of platform and the online sellers, and we also consider transportation. That means if the online sales, because they use what kind of tools they use, the transportation they use, and the storage, and also when the courier, and when the customers buy, receive, and return or change. So the transportation should be taken into account. And we also consider advertising and information on the internet, because we are worrying about on the internet. So we want to ensure the safe and compliant information as the label, because some people they enlarged their use. So that part will ensure the online pesticide advertisement to provide accurate, balanced information and avoid the misleading to the customer. And we have a reporting system to ensure if there are some incidents, it could be reported correctly. And for supervision and enforcement for the government, so they should do some monitoring, they should do some audit, inspection from the whole chain of the supply.
Thank you, Tao. I
Okay.
think you've covered quite a lot of what's going to be in the document. Thank you very much for that. I see
Okay,
Chris has joined us now. But I have asked the participants if they have any questions. So if they have any questions specifically in what you said in relation to the situation in China, or if they have any questions about the JMPM guidance document that's coming out, to please post them in the chat. So thank you very much for giving us that overview. And we're definitely learning quite a lot from what's going on in China. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Andrea.
Thanks, Tao. Chris, if you can turn on your video and unmute yourself. We proceeded because I realized you were having some internet connection. So if you want to, are you there?
Yes, Prof. I'm here now. Good afternoon and good morning, good night.
I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Christopher Kanema. I'm from Zambia. I work with Zambia Environmental Management Agency. I'm the Rotterdam focal point and also heading the pesticides unit here in the agency. And I'm happy to share our thoughts concerning Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So please go ahead and proceed. And Tao, in the meantime, there are questions for you in the chat if you want to respond to those in written. Otherwise, I'll give you a chance a bit later to speak.
Yeah, so in terms of pesticides management in Zambia, like I mentioned, we have the Zambia Environmental Management Agency. This is an agency that has been established by the Act of Parliament, which is the Environmental Management Act number 12 of 2011. This is the act that regulates pesticides in Zambia. And under that, we have the statutory instrument number 112 of 2013. This one helps in going into subsidiary regulations in terms of pesticide management. So you'll see in these two pieces of legislation, the pesticide is defined as any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, or controlling any pest. These might include vectors of disease or unwanted species of plants or animals causing harm or otherwise interfering with normal functioning of a system. So this is how a pesticide is defined. So it's quite broad. And so you have biopesticides and the synthetic pesticides controlled under the same act. Next, please. So this act follows the life cycle approach in managing pesticides from manufacturing, storage, transportation, use until we come to disposal. Next, please. So the act places a responsibility to players and also provides a mandate to the agency. If you look into section 65, the responsibility to industry is looking at what industry or any person would like to do within the life cycle of a pesticide. So if you intend to manufacture, to import, export, store, distribute, transport, you require to have a license. So in short, you cannot deal in a pesticide without authorization of the agency. So this is a responsibility on players. And when we go to the next slide, you have the mandate of the institution, which is enshrined in section 66. This is where you see the control coming in. So you control the import, the export, storage, distribution, sale, use, packaging, transportation, and so forth. Then the act also provides for labeling and packaging of these pesticides. So you also have a responsibility as an agency to review the use and the efficacy of pesticides that are already on the market. But there's also a clause which I like the most, to do all such things as necessary for the monitoring and control of pesticides. So this is a blanket mandate, of which if things are not covered within the Act, but emerging issues, you can use this clause in terms of regulating. Next slide, please. So the Act goes to actually define what type of labels needs to be on the pesticide, and this provides for the agency to actually approve and endorse the approval of the label, and to an extent, the agency is supposed to keep and ensure that there is the maintenance of these labels that are approved, to ensure that in case you are doing or conducting compliance monitoring, you'll be able to make reference to what was approved and what is on the market. So you're able to verify. So when we talk about online sales, this is something that I'm going to speak to just now, but if the label is not approved by the agency, then it's not allowed to be on the Zambian market. Next, please. So the Act also provides for offenses. This is very key when we come to the issue of online sales of pesticides. The Act actually defines the type of offense. You are not allowed to detach or alter or destroy the label. So this is a label that is approved, but if you detach or you alter, then you are creating an offense. Or a person shall not actually distribute or sell or offer for sale or store or import or export or transport or deal in a manner with any unregistered pesticide or without a license. So you have these scenarios where you have unregistered. So if you look at online sales, these are products that are advertised elsewhere and they are not registered. So the law says you cannot actually even offer for sale. So a person who contravenes this section commits an offense and is liable upon conviction to a fine not exceeding 500,000 penalty units. I don't know how I can translate this into dollars, but it's quite substantive. And so these are the offenses. Next, please. So what are the challenges that we are facing here in Zambia? The first thing is that internet-based pesticide marketing in Zambia is a new and evolving medium of pesticide sales and distribution. So you find that the law is not explicit to talk about online sales of pesticides. So the distribution of it, like Tao mentioned, they are transported in these public vehicles and so forth, and they are coming from other countries and so forth. Like Zambia, we have about 8 or so neighboring countries. So if the product is advertised, let's say in Tanzania or Kenya, then it will come through our borders using public transport. Sometimes some of these products are coming in small quantities and you cannot actually detect them. So it increases the risk. And the law might restrict pesticide commerce, of course, like issuing licenses to the distributors, to those that sell or offer for sale, and also advertising. But what we see is that the law is not actually very specific. It does not make reference to actually the online sales. So as we see this as a growing market or as a growing medium of dealing with chemicals, we still have lacunas in the law in terms of how do we reach out to adverts that are online? Are they within our jurisdiction and so forth? Then, like I mentioned, pesticide advertised online may not be registered in Zambia or may not contain a label that is approved, but it's being advertised. So when a consumer sees it online, they want to control cockroaches, they want to control termites, they would want to buy. And of course, the shipment of it is done and it comes through our borders using public transport. So that is something that it's new to us. We regulate what is advertised, but we have not taken a step to look at what is being advertised, let's say online. So this is one of the challenges that we face. Now, this creates an enforcement challenge in that products are actually out there and the law provides for prosecution of a person or a company that is domiciled within Zambia. So how do we now enforce the law on companies that are advertising or the owners of the company that are outside the country and so forth? So that creates a challenge. Apart from that, consumer may not be able to identify whether this is a counterfeit products or not. So they are just advertised there. And we are seeing a lot of products that are being advertised online. Actually, what we've noticed is that the people that are advertising are not actually even trained or they have the capacity to explain these pesticides in detail in case the consumers would like to get more details. So these are some of the challenges that we face. I would like to end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. You've taken us through some very important information and the way that you took us through your legislation and how the current legislation actually can be used for online pesticide management, even though it doesn't necessarily specifically refer to the sales of online pesticides. So thank you for that and for highlighting your challenges. There are quite a few questions that have been coming through to the chat. So we do encourage you, for those of you who are participants, the chat function is at the bottom of your screen in the middle. And if you click on that, you'll see people are posting your questions. We do not take questions verbally from from participants, but I do invite Tao and Chris to speak to the questions. I know, Tao, you have answered some already in written, but if you'd like to come back on and turn your video on, as well as Chris, you can speak to them. In the meantime, we're encouraging people to discuss the first question in the chat. So what are the current challenges that governments or other organizations are experiencing with online sales, and what are potential solutions? So Tao, go ahead, Chris.
Yes, I've taken note of the contributions that are in the chat. Of course, as SAPRef, this is the Southern African Regulatory Forum, has taken this as a regional issue. I'm seeing South Africa here indicating some of the challenges, and also in Malawi that the law is silent on online sales, which I agree, and also that there could be some illegal trade, and some of these products might not conform to the labeling standards, which creates an offense, like in Zambia, to bring a product that has a label that is not approved. So I feel this is a regional issue which we should take up as a SAPRef.
Yes, thanks for that, Chris. And I think we'll find that in many regions that this needs to be a regional issue for addressing and not only a country specific. We have posted the first poll. The link is in the chat. If you click on Mentimeter, and I see many of you are already responding, whether your country has specific regulations or not. Tao, I'm not sure if you saw the question from Baker, who asked, with online sales of pesticides, how do you ensure people who buy pesticides have relevant training on how to apply the products they buy, and who monitors if there are any environmental effects resulting from the pesticide application? Tao, do you want to speak to that? You're welcome to unmute yourself.
Okay, so Andrea, could you please repeat the question again?
Yes, it's in the chat. It was at 2:14, I believe. So the question is, with online sales of pesticides, but from what I've read, from what you said, is China does not allow online sales of pesticides. But the question is, how do you ensure people who buy pesticides have relevant training on how to apply the products, and who monitors the environmental effects?
Yeah, that's quite difficult to answer. So for the training of the buyers, because in China we have really small scale farms, so the farmers, they are the buyers. So we have some plant protection services to train, to educate the farmers how to recognize the pesticide, which one is legal or illegal, from registration, from production, license, and so on. So
this is specific for online sales. So how do you train people who buy pesticides online?
Not specific for online, but it's for farmers.
Okay.
Because so for all the farmers. So for the environmental risks, it's quite difficult to monitor. It's quite difficult to relate it, which problem is from the online sales or offline sales. But we do have some environmental monitoring system from provinces. So the government, the agriculture department, they do that.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a question from Rico. How does China regulate sales of illegal or banned or highly hazardous pesticides on online platforms? Are there examples of successful removals of HHPs from online platforms?
Yeah, for HHPs, it's not allowed to be sold online. So so we have enforcement system. We have the provincial level, the county level. They have special enforcement teams. They will monitor or inspect the stores, online stores, offline stores. We also have some sampling program. So we opt for offline stores. They just go to the store to take samples. For online sales, we have colleagues, they buy the samples from online stores and to check the quality. So we have such kind of system.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And you can ask further questions or clarification in the chat if you like. Chris, there's a question for you from Baker. I'm not sure if you've already responded to it in the chat. So he's referring to your section 65 1 for people who are requiring a license. And he's asking, a person intending to use a pesticide is not included in terms of the licensing, and he's asking why is that? Chris, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, Prof, sorry, I was trying to unmute. The question is on section 65, right?
Correct. Yeah, about licensing. And the question is why does a person who is going to use the pesticide doesn't need to be licensed?
Yeah, so like I mentioned that we regulate the life cycle at any given stage. Maybe the text that I put out did not include the use, but when you go to the responsibility of players, there's a use, and also when you go to section 66, there's an issue of sale, use, packaging, and so forth. I think it's just maybe I left it out. Otherwise, when you go into the stages in the life cycle, there's also use. So you have to be licensed. I must be quick to mention that some of the activities might not have a fee schedule to them, but the agency ensures that they monitor those that are using or those that are advertising the pesticides. So you have to get the approval for you to use certain chemicals, even advertising. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris, for that. And Becca, if you have further questions, you can ask them in the chat. Before we move on to the next poll, I'd just like to respond to poll 1, where you can see that many countries are saying they don't have specific regulations. But the 3 of you who are saying yes, that you have specific regulations to online pesticides, perhaps you could just give the country names in the chat. That would be helpful. We'll go on to poll 2. Are there any other questions that you're seeing or comments you're seeing in the chat, either Tao or Chris, that you would like to respond to? Many comments about countries not having online legislation, legislation for online sales of pesticides.
Yeah, I feel like I mentioned, the majority of participants are indicating that they either do not have the legislation which is in place is silent or it's not sufficient and so forth. So I feel that there is need. I was looking at the EU. The EU has legislation on that. The US, they have. So it would be good for us within our regions, whether it's the Southern or African region or Asia Pacific or whatever, to have a standard or harmonized regulation which will help actually regulate the sale of pesticides online. It's something that, like I mentioned, SAPRef will be looking into that.
Thank you for that. So in the interest of time, we are going to move on to question 2. Chris and Tao, if I could ask you, there are still questions coming in. For example, Chris, Debbie has asked you, how does Zambia regulate online sales? Could you please respond in the chat? That would be most useful. And you can see from the second poll that's been posted that at the moment, the largest challenge that regulatory authorities are facing with online sales is the actual platforms themselves and then the retailers. And I think that's a nice segue then for us to the next presenter. So Darcy, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and turn your video on and introduce yourself and to take us through to question 2. Thank you.
you. My name is Darcy Quinn. I'm the Director of Anti-Counterfeiting for CropLife International. I'm based in Brussels, Belgium. I've been dealing with anti-counterfeiting for many years in different industries because all industries with successful products are getting counterfeited, including pesticides. So this is my expertise in investigating counterfeiting. And what I'd like to address today in regards to online sales is basically the role of e-commerce platforms. They profit from the sale of pesticides. They're involved in the sale of pesticides. They facilitate the sale of pesticides and at times illegal pesticides inadvertently. What is their role and their obligation? They are the gateway for sales of pesticides online. Okay, and I think that often we're focused on buyers and sellers and buyers. It's like ants. Focus on the roles and obligations of online platforms, the Alibabas, the Amazons of the world. Do these online platforms ask of their clients, their sellers of pesticides, if the seller has a valid registration certificate in the country of sale? That should be the preliminary statement from anybody to anybody who wants to sell online. Do you have a registration certificate? Yes or no? The second issue is I think that the online platforms, to protect themselves and also from a reputational angle, they should be storing these registration certificates for further inspection by the regulators, because instead of the regulators having to chase down individual buyers, individual sellers that are just everywhere, they could easily go to the large online platforms and say, show us the registration certificates from your clients, from your sellers of pesticides for inspection. Okay. And then another thought was something very simple. Why can't the online platforms require that the sellers of pesticides online post their license or whatever registration they have to show that they are legally allowed to sell those pesticides? So I'm looking at this really as a systematic issue of where we have the most leverage in preventing the sales of illegal pesticides. And for me, it starts with the big online platforms. And I think if you read the newspapers today, you're seeing that the online platforms are actually coming to grips with illegal activity on their platforms and doing something about it, and doing it from a corporate social responsibility aspect, not only just the application of pesticide laws, etc. And I think that if people approach the online platforms and explain to them what the baseline laws are for selling pesticides, I think it would be very reasonable that the online platforms would want to abide by the existing baseline laws. You have to have a registration in the country of intended sale, and maybe have some kind of proof from your customers that they're allowed to sell the pesticides. So it's a very short, concise message, but I think that we need to shift who should be doing what onto the online platforms to make the job easier for the pesticide regulators to do their job. And that's about it at this point. I welcome your questions.
So thank you for that, Darcy. So if we could have the next slide, please. So the question now is, what should be the role of internet platforms in addressing online sales of pesticides? So we welcome you to post your questions in the chat. There are comments coming through. So Darcy, there's a question, are there countries that have proper and clear regulations in place that state the offline regulations apply to online too? Sorry, that's more for the previous speakers, I think. So there's a comment from Debbie. If you can see, are you seeing the comments coming through? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in regards to the whack-a-mole comment, we've got to start somewhere. We can't keep making excuses why we can't do something. Let's start with the legitimate big online platforms and set an example with them and cooperate with them so that they will be asking who their customers are. They can't just willy-nilly be selling a dangerous product such as pesticides or nuclear waste or bombs or bullets or guns without any regulation. So I think that we need to go back to the online platforms and say, as a baseline, when you're selling pesticides, these are the things that you need to do. And I don't think they will object. The thing is, who is actually approaching the online platforms right now to say, please do this? And I think it's the role of the regulators. Our industry is helping the regulators in different countries outline the positions in each country, what the laws are, so that the regulators are empowered to go back to the online platforms. And I think little by little, or fast by fast, we'll be able to get the online platforms to fall into place without changing laws, because it's a reputational disaster for online platforms if they're called out for selling dangerous products online, including but not limited to unlicensed pesticides. So I think there's a whole corporate social responsibility department in a lot of these online platforms that we can go to and start with. The millions of other little platforms that are running around, okay, we can get to those, but let's start with what we can control, what we can reach, who will listen to us. And those are the big online platforms. And I think they will listen to us if we speak up.
So there is a poll question. Again, you can click on the Menti link in the chat. What should be the role of industry in relation to online sales of pesticides? So Darcy, do you think that the current legislation that countries have would allow for these online platforms to be licensed, and should they be licensed?
Not the platforms being licensed, but the platforms asking their sellers to show that they have a license. In other words, the platforms would be the guardian of the gate to say, you want to sell pesticides on our online platform? Where is your license? Where are your papers?
Yeah, it's kind of a gray area though, isn't it? Because the platforms in a sense are selling the products. They're allowing for the selling. So should they be somehow licensed?
Well, it depends on how you define sellers, because if you're profiting from the sale of an object, then I would consider you to be a seller. They are facilitating the sales of the pesticides. I mean, without them, there would be no online sales of pesticides. So I would that's an important part in all legislation. The definition of sellers, whatever, where JMPM draft, whatever, has got to include online platforms as a seller. Otherwise, if you disassociate the online platforms from the definition of seller, then you're back to the big, going in circles all the time. Online platforms are the answer to this, and I think they'd be willing to cooperate with us.
Yeah, so I think the issue of the licensing is still something that perhaps we need to discuss a bit further. There's a question from Sarah for you. If platforms are able to remove dangerous goods like arms and weapons, why can't they be extended to illicit pesticides?
I guess they can, but at the same time, the pesticides are the most regulated product in the world. Just apply the same regulations and standards that you have to bricks and mortar to the legal industry, and just apply those to online platforms. I mean, cars can be dangerous if you drive them erratically. Doesn't mean you stop selling cars on online platforms,
So there's quite a few comments coming through on the poll on your screen. I don't know if you'd like to comment on any of those in terms of the role of the industry.
I'm just trying to, if you could just synthesize, because I'm trying to read everything scrolling over my screen very quickly, and anything that strikes
Natasha,
you,
can you
Andrea?
move it? Natasha, can you move it back to the beginning?
Is there a specific question?
So they're
that-
not questions, they're comments.
Yeah.
So it's all to do with the role of the industry. There's quite a few. There's labeling,
sorry.
so more detailed information on labeling, industry following legislation. Can you see those?
We want the same regulations that apply to us, and they should apply to online platforms. What we are doing as an industry is we're writing to regulators around the world about the online sales of pesticides in the country, giving them the legal analysis, going to the regulators, going to the government, and asking the government to instruct their regulators to go approach online platforms and explicitly state what the rules are. We've had success in the Philippines. We've had success in Sri Lanka. We have a meeting in 2 weeks with the Malaysian authorities on specifically online sales of pesticides. So on our side, we are reminding the regulators and the governments that the rules already exist as they apply to us. We want them to apply to everybody that's selling pesticides, including online platforms. And we've had positive responses in the Philippines. The Philippines wrote a letter. The regulators wrote a letter to the leaders of I think it was Lazada in the Philippines, explicitly stating, you are breaking the law. This is the law. If you continue, we will prosecute you.
So there's an interesting comment here. Basically, you were saying that it's the platform's responsibilities to make sure that the sellers are licensed.
Chat forums or online platforms?
Online platforms. Sorry, but I've lost the, I think the comments have moved. Now I've lost it. Here we are. So no, sorry, Natasha, just go back a little bit. That's perfect. Thank you. So one of the comments on the poll is that industry should not sell or to companies that are not accredited for sellers online. So in other words, that those who are selling the products online are buying it from somewhere, and that perhaps there's a role and a responsibility for the industry at that level, according to this comment.
The industry follows the law. If the law requires that you sell pesticides to people who only have license to sell pesticides, then that's a moot question. If the law has to be followed all the way down, we are focusing. Why we are carving out an exception for online platforms, I don't know. Everybody else is following the law in regards to pesticides. We just want it applied to online platforms, and I think everybody does. And I even think the online platforms want it to apply to them if somebody would explicitly state to them what the law is.
So there's a comment from Debbie, and perhaps this is something for Tao and Chris to think about as well, is can the regulators make it a requirement that chemical companies cannot sell their products to unregistered and unregulated online platforms? So again, pulling in the industry in the responsibility chain.
If that's the law, then the law is being followed by the industry.
So it goes back to legislation again.
I think it goes back to,
monitoring.
the existing legislation should be applied to everybody. Why is there a carve out for online platforms who, again, profit from the sale of pesticides, encourage the sale of pesticides, and for whatever reason, they're exempted from the practice that the rest of us have to follow? And I think, again, they will follow if they're approached voluntarily.
So there's a question from Pendile asking, will internet platforms be able to determine the legitimacy of the pesticides sold, as they could be counterfeit, and who will be responsible for checking if it is actually a product sold or perhaps a banned product?
We've done the same thing with the vessel industry, who are inadvertently delivering illegal pesticides a lot. And we say to them, you've got to know, as a delivery company, vessel delivery companies, you need to know who your customer is. You don't need to know what is in the box. You don't need to know a specialist on pesticides or on counterfeits or whatever, but you at least need to know who your customer is, so that if something goes wrong, we can track it back to the people who gave you the box. And this not only applies to pesticides, but to any other products that are being counterfeited. So I think it's the who and not the what. I mean, you can't ask people to examine or test every single box that's coming through, whether it's Nike tennis shoes, medicine, or pesticides. But you do need to know who your customers are in this world in the 20th century. Part of the responsibility of freedom of trade is responsibility, and knowing your customer, I think, is one of the key factors. And that's what I'm saying, that the online platforms need to know who their customers are and make sure their customers are legally allowed to sell the pesticide in the country of intended sale. It's just shifting the responsibility away from the millions of sellers and buyers and putting it back under the main actor that controls the whole thing. And I think they'll do it, the online platforms.
I think what's important is points that are being made by many people, and Rico is also reiterating this point. There's a shared responsibility. So yes, I think what you highlight with the internet platforms is valid, but the industry still has a responsibility, as Rico says, to make sure that HHPs aren't being accessible, that they're not sold, that they're not a source. So if there is a highly hazardous pesticide that is banned in a country, it shouldn't be able to be sold then in another country through the online platform. So using the industry for self-regulation as well.
If, for instance, if somebody said they can't sell an HHP in a country or in a region, that is applied. But if people come in and sort of criminal intervening events come in and smuggle product around and use different legitimate means of commerce like internet, online platforms, that's where you lose. People, once it's in the stream of commerce, if somebody wants to come in and illegally use a pesticide or take it to a country that it's not legally allowed to be sold, that's a criminal event that's out of our control. We just had a bank robbery factory robbery 2 days ago in Brazil. $10 million worth of pesticides were stolen at gunpoint in Brazil. All right. Now, where did those pesticides end up? We have a gang that held up everybody at gunpoint. That's legal pesticides now being stolen that are going to go into the marketplace. So there's
a comment by Tom. I think we will slowly move on. We've got one last poll, I believe, but just before we go to the next poll, just a comment on the previous one. People are thinking, who's responsible to pay for storage and destruction of illegal online pesticides would be the manufacturers, and then the retailers and perhaps the platforms. I think this is another discussion in itself, but we'll move on to the next poll. And then Tom highlights the point of whether extended producer responsibility schemes could be used to control online platforms. And he gives the example of South Africa. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Darcy.
Yeah, could you repeat the question? I didn't quite hear it.
So Tom has highlighted the extended producer responsibility schemes and programs that are now being encouraged within countries, and whether that could be used to control online platforms. And he gives the example of perhaps in South Africa.
I don't know enough about the program to say yes or no, but I think that anything of that nature that illuminates some of the solutions that we're facing right now with online platforms is very welcome.
I think that's a good scheme to look into. So who should engage with internet platforms in relation to online sales of pesticides? You can see the responses are coming through. Some say industry, national governments, consumer groups, media, sounds like everyone. The regulators. So there's varying perspectives on that.
I think online platforms will pay much more attention to a government and government regulators coming into their office to open up the discussion rather than the other folks. The other folks are really important to bring it up from an advocacy perspective. But when the government gets involved with the regulators and coming into the office of Alibaba, whomever, and explaining what the situation is, I think the online platforms will listen a little harder.
So Zhang has made a comment that those who produce and sell illegal products should be held accountable. That's not always so easy, but yes.
No, I agree with that. It's just very hard to find the counterfeiters. And also what happens is the prosecutors will prosecute them for criminal sanctions. And sometimes the burden of proof is so high that they don't meet the burden of proof. So they're let off not guilty. Perhaps there's another way of looking at it and lowering the sanctions, the prosecutorial sanctions against counterfeiters. So it's easier to get a judgment against them. That would include the responsibility of paying for storage and destruction. Because on the criminal sanctions, if you go after folks with criminal sanctions, sometimes the prosecutors just are overwhelmed. But if you have an administrative sanction against somebody, it could be an anti-littering, it could be, storage of a non-regulated product. That might be easier to prove on an administrative level, and that the penalties there would also include responsibility for paying storage and destruction. Maybe easier to get guilty verdicts through administrative sanctions rather than constantly going after people with criminal sanctions.
So we are going to shortly move on. I think we have one more poll. Is that correct? Natasha, do we have another poll?
This is the last.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Darcy, do you want to make any, we are now going to move on to our final question. Do you want to make any final comments on what you've read and seen in the chat and on the polls?
It's just interesting. It's just hard to speed read all the different questions coming at you at once. But I appreciate these forums. I think they're terrific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darcy, for your input and for your thoughts and opinions on this important topic. Taurai, I see you've got your hand up. Can you please post your question in the chat? Alia, I'm going to invite you to please unmute yourself. There you are, and put your video on. And if you could introduce yourself and take us through your presentation. Thank you very much. We can't hear you for some reason. Although it says you're unmuted. There we are.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Just
Please
let
go
me
ahead.
know because sometimes I'm having the mic problems. Hi everyone. Good afternoon, good evening everyone. I'm Alia Diyana. I'm working with the Pesticide Action Network Asia Pacific, where I'm working with Asian communities on the ground and also international levels, such as Rotterdam and also Stockholm Convention. So I'm the project coordinator for some of the pesticide issues that happen in Asia Pacific region. So today I'm going to share with you about one of our investigation, which is unboxed online sale of banned HHPs in Malaysia via e-commerce platforms. Next slide, please. So in terms of the background of the investigation, there's a surge of online sales in Malaysia due to the COVID-19 restrictions in terms of movement from 2019 onward. So there's the net income of e-commerce reached around 288 billion ringgit Malaysia. And at the same time in Malaysia, there's a sale value of pesticide that was 4.11 billion ringgit Malaysia, approximately around 905 million USD. And we also have 338 HHPs were listed in the Pan International List of HHPs, where it is harmful to the human and also environmental health. In Malaysia, we have thousands of poisoning cases, contamination of tap or surface waters of rivers. And then we also have pesticide injection as a method of suicide, millions of agricultural workers exposures to toxic pesticides. In terms of laws and also regulation in Malaysia, we have 1974 Pesticide Act that covers the production, sale, import, export, storage, and use of pesticides. And Malaysian Pesticide Board is the mandate within this act. And any activities that contravene this Pesticide Act can impose penalties, including fine and also prison sentences. And there's only 48 pesticides are banned or restricted in Malaysia under the same act. However, there's a new area which the online shopping platforms have become an expanding avenue for the sale of banned HHPs. Next slide, please. So from our investigation, we investigated 3 pesticides, which are paraquat, endosulfan, prefenophos. Paraquat banned in 2002, reinstated in 2006, and banned in 2020. Meanwhile, endosulfan was banned in 2005, and prefenophos was banned in 2014. In terms of platforms investigated, we have discovered 3 platforms, which is Shopee, Lazada, and others platforms such as FarmPace, Katani Organics, and also Alibaba. So the similarity between these 3 platforms, they are shipping their products to Malaysia. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, thank you. In terms of issues identified during our investigation, the first one is the illegal sale. We found that there's a sale of banned HHPs on the e-commerce platforms in Malaysia that contravene our national law, the platform guidelines, and also the International Code of Conduct on Pesticide Management. And then in terms of labels, some of the pesticide, for example, prefenophos and also paraquat, appears to be counterfeit, with designs that are different from the design of the official company labels. And then we also have discontinued products, for example, Thiodine, which is no longer listed in the website, but they are still being sold online. In terms of volumes of pesticides available, for example, we have paraquat. We discovered that there are 3 volumes available, which is 1, 4, and 20 liters of bottles, with little to no restrictions on the total amount purchased. And for the distribution, the products are either sold domestically or imported from countries like Vietnam, China, India, and Thailand. And then we also identified that there's a misinformation where there's an attempt to conceal the true nature or toxicity by blocking images, using only active ingredient name or not listing adequate information in the product description section. For the packaging and shipping, there's a lack of proper packaging, spillage. So the spillage is actually from the consumer reviews in the e-commerce platform, and also fumes leak. Our PANAP teams actually purchase and receive this product, and they identify that there's fumes leak in terms of the package. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, from the left side, we have paraquat that is available in 3 volumes, which is 1, 4, and 20 liters. And then we also have unlabeled pesticides that were sold online. And the 3rd column shows that there's an attempt to conceal the pesticides, and only the pesticide active ingredients are available. And there's no information or description or any guidance for the consumers.
And then in the fourth column, you can see that there's descriptions available in some of the products, but it is very small. And sometimes when you try to zoom in, it's like pixelated. So it's very hard for the consumer to read. And then below there, we have in local language, we have that the pesticides in the product description only explains about on which insects they are going to be used on. And there's no instructions or guidance in terms of usage or danger of these banned pesticides. And down there we have Thiodan, which is no longer available in the website, but it's available and can be found online. And the last one we have here is Selecron. So one is from the Shopee Malaysia and the other one is from Shopee Philippines. We can see that there's different in terms of logos from the official logos, which the products may appear that maybe it's counterfeit. Next slide, please. Okay. For the PANAP recommendations, we provided recommendations to our Malaysian government, especially Malaysian Pesticide Board, to enforce penalties, e-commerce platform operators and sellers, and also the media, consumer rights groups, and also the public. And we also have ongoing follow-up with Malaysian Pesticide Board to enforce, and we are going to initiate a similar investigations in other countries in the region, especially in the Asia Pacific region. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alia, for presenting the case study of online sales, particularly of the HHP and banned pesticides in Malaysia. I think it's very important, these types of examples. And I see the report has been shared in the chat, and I do encourage people to read it and look at it if you haven't already. So we're going to move on to the final question for today's discussion. What are the roles and concerns of NGOs in dealing with online sales of pesticides? You can post your comments and questions. If you have questions for Alia as well, if you would post them in the chat, and we'll also go on to the first poll. So the Mentimeter link is in the chat again, and you can click on it. So are there any specific regulations on online sales of banned pesticides in your countries? And we've already heard many of you say there aren't, and a few of you to indicate that there are. Please include your country in your response. That's most helpful, rather than just saying no or yes. Thank you. So Alia, perhaps you could respond to the report, I know it's a recent report, but the reactions that you've had so far to the report. Have there been any responses from governments?
Yes, Andrea, we actually initiated a conversation with our Malaysian Pesticide Board, and they are very open to it. And we can see that there's reducing numbers of pesticides, especially paraquat in the e-commerce platforms. And also we are working on the follow-up reports. So it is more details in terms of the investigation.
Thank you. Yes, it's a very important report. So do other participants from other countries and regions feel that this report is useful? So the evidence coming out from Malaysia? I don't know, maybe Chris and Tao, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I feel the report is very critical and is giving a lot of insight. So it would be good for the regions to have access to it. You can also use it for lessons learned.
Thank you. Tao, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's okay, no problem.
Thank you.
This is Darcy. I think it's a terrific report. I think that there's an opportunity here for PAN and even CropLife International to work together in regards to illegal pesticides that are in the marketplace. I think it's a missed opportunity. You've got a lot of observations. We've got a lot of solutions and observations. Why not think about working together and using the Malaysia report as an example? Because I think a lot of the so-called quote unquote pesticides that are being sold are illegal and counterfeit pesticides, as you can see from the Malaysia report. We have a common enemy, PAN and CropLife International, and the common enemy are illegal and counterfeit pesticides. On that, we have an island of communication that we could work together on that specific issue, because the illegal pesticide market is growing rapidly now, and it's threatening PAN and it's threatening us. How can we work together to eliminate the illegal sale of pesticides and sale of illegal pesticides? So it's an invitation to talk further.
Thanks, Darcy, for that comment. Alia, I don't know if you want to respond.
Yes, thank you so much, Darcy, for the comments and also invitation. But the report is kind of new, and I think it's very like for us, it's very general. So we are trying to investigate more, and hopefully in the future we can help the government to reduce the number of pesticides in terms of the e-commerce platforms.
Let us know if you need help. I mean, it's me. You know, I've been doing this for a while. I can help you out.
So Alia, there is a comment for you from Yarit, asking what advice you would give countries like Ethiopia that are not, who don't have online sales, according to Yarit, and how to prepare themselves in the future for when online sales occur. And maybe if you can just turn your volume up a bit when you respond, that'd be great.
Let me check. I hope you can hear me right now.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Sorry about that. Yes, I think our advice is, like, for example, in Malaysia, we have e-commerce platforms named Shopee, and it already prohibited the sales of pesticides. So I think looking at that more intensively in terms of the platforms prohibit items, and then focus more. So and then also increase in terms of monitoring, because sometimes they mention about the prohibit items, for example, pesticides in the Shopee platform, but there's no monitoring. So I think the two things are very important, where you have to look at it in terms of the prohibited items and also the monitoring.
Thank you for that response. So in response to what tools and strategies can NGO organizations use to drive enforcement of regulation of online sales, pesticides? And I can see in the chat, a lot of people are indicating advocacy and awareness raising. And I think the report that you've just presented is a good example of that.
Yes, Andrea, I think the report is kind of initiate a step for us, new step for us to move the advocacy and also awareness, because this is a new investigation from PANAP itself.
So Nosiko has asked a question. Nosiko, you might need to unpack it a bit more. So how is enforcement ensured across national jurisdiction? Alia, I don't know if you want to respond to that, or if you want to ask Nosiko for more details. So she's saying, is there a role for intergovernmental organizations like the World Trade Organization?
In terms of that, actually, there's only monitoring of this pesticide online, but there's no specific enforcement in terms of the national jurisdiction. So Malaysia government is also working on the monitoring of the banned pesticides. I think maybe online is a new area for them. Yeah.
And do you think there's a role for the World Trade Organization to be involved in the regulation of online sales? Alia, or perhaps anyone? Does Tao or Darcy or Chris have a thought on that? Any comments on the World Trade Organization? So I don't see anyone coming forth with that. Perhaps Nusika, you could post if you think yourself whether the World Trade Organization has a role to play and how that would materialize. Natasha, can you confirm that you're hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Thanks.
We can hear you, Prof.
Thank you. And no one was responding, so I wasn't sure. So Surya says, as guardians of legitimate trade, the World Trade Organization must recognize illicit trade as a global phenomenon and target specific actions and policy to tackle this problem. Thank you for that comment. Tao or Chris, do you want to comment on any of the questions that have come to you? We do have a few more minutes if you wanted to. Is there anything else that you would like to comment on before we close?
From my end, I think Debbie wanted to know how Zambia regulates online pesticides. Just to respond that, like I mentioned, the law is not specific. However, all elements of commerce are within the law. So it's possible to regulate the sale because it does not indicate where you regulate. So someone who is selling or someone who is advertising doesn't really mention where you advertise, but how you advertise. The issue of labeling, the law provides for approval of a label. So a label that might come online, it might be outside the country, but for it to come into the country, should we get hold of it, then it is subject to the law. So that's what I thought I would. I'm seeing another question from Debbie. But how do you do it practically in Zambia? Yeah, the practicality of it is when you come to the border, Debbie, Zambia is actually land linked. We are linked to Zimbabwe, Tanzania on this side, Botswana, and so forth. So when the products are coming, if they are advertised online and they bring them into the country, they are subject to what I've been talking about. So the challenge is that some of these might be coming as 2 bottles or small quantities, which makes it a bit of a challenge to actually discover them in these public vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chris. Alia, do you want to have any final comments before we close? Or do you want to comment on anything that you've seen on the poll?
I think I'm good.
Okay, great, thank you. Then I would like to thank all the presenters for today. It was a very dynamic presentation. Sorry, Tao, did you want to make a final comment?
Yeah, sorry. For NGOs in China, the NGOs really contribute a lot. They did a lot of survey to find some wrong or problems from online sales of pesticide. So they have their own data. They want to protect the legal services. That's one point. Another point is we have some organizations I mentioned, like the industry association. So they work with the platforms, the online stores together to draft, to establish their self-discipline guidances. So that's really important. So the regulation authorities will look at the self-discipline guidance if it works well. So we can shift, we can change the self-discipline guidance into official guidance. That's a good way to move forward. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. And really, what you've touched on again, it's the way that we structured the panel today was to have heard from governments, have heard from industry, and to hear from NGOs. And really, in tackling this issue with online sales of pesticides, it really is a multi-stakeholder approach and bringing in the platforms as well. So I hope the discussion today has given you a lot of food for thought, and that we continue to work together from different sectors to address what is becoming more and more of a problematic concern within countries. So I'd like to thank all the presenters for bringing in rich information. The recording and the slides will be shared with you. If you have registered, make sure that you've registered for the Pesticide Discussion Forum. We will also be producing a summary digest, which we will circulate to you as well if you have signed up. I'd like to thank Natasha, who is in the background and was making sure that this was an efficient discussion today. We will have an evaluation. Please make sure that you fill that out. We do have a newsletter on top of having these discussions, so please make sure you sign up for our pesticide newsletter. And our next discussion, next slide, please, Natasha. Our next discussion will be on the 7th of September, and we will be sending around notifications about the topic and the presenters for that. So thanks again to all of you. We'll leave the site open for a bit if you want to make some final comments, and I wish you all a good day, a good evening, or a good morning. And thanks again. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.